Hello, everyone. We'll get started formally in just a moment. These are some shots of the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. If this were pre-COVID, you might be here, but we're just going to show you some pictures for a minute. And when my computer clock strikes 7, I'm going to begin a little introduction of Dr. Gutman, and I shall call him Huck henceforth by permission. And they'll turn the
That is the Bierstadt painting that is the glory of the Athenaeum.
The domes of the Yosemite. Okay, 7 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bob Jolly. I'm the director of the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. And on behalf of us, the Athenaeum, we welcome you to our April 1st Wednesday event, Walt Whitman, American poet, with Huck Gutman, and I will introduce him formally in just a minute. I'm joined by Catherine Tufano, Development and Data Associate for Vermont Humanities. You can see her picture on the screen. A few thank yous, a few notes about the housekeeping things, and I'll introduce Huck. We extend our thanks to Vermont Humanities partners, as well as the generous underwriters who make it possible for us to offer such rich and robust programming. The sponsor of the entire first Wednesday season is the Vermont Department of Libraries and the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The underwriter for this program is the University of Vermont Office of Engagement. And the Athenaeum series underwriters are Adler and McCabe PLC and the Friends of the Athenaeum. Tonight, we come together from across the state, maybe even around the world via Zoom, to learn and to be inspired together. Before we begin, here is a few brief housekeeping notes. We will be using the chat feature to handle questions this evening. Please add your questions to the chat during the event, and Huck will answer them, some of them at the end of his presentation, but he will also, and we'll have his email address here, he will respond to you personally. Every single person who has a question, you are going to get a personal answer from Huck.
Right.
We've enabled live transcription and captioning. If that's a help to you, you can turn it on in the bottom menu. It's machine generated. If you've seen this before, it gets some surnames a little mangled, but generally it's a pretty good feature given its real-time captioning. We are recording this. You can email info@vermonthumanities.org if you'd like to have the link to the video that you can share with others. Tomorrow morning, you will receive a brief evaluation form that we kindly ask you to complete. Your feedback is important to us, and we appreciate you taking the time to offer your thoughts for this evening's events. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Huck Gutman. He is an emeritus professor of English at the University of Vermont, where he taught American literature for close to 50 years and won both of the university's major teaching awards. A former chief of staff to Senator Bernie Sanders, he has twice been a Fulbright scholar in Portugal and in India. The author of 4 books, he sends out a regular poetry letter to subscribers, which can be accessed from www.huckgutman.com, HUCKGUTMAN.com. And I told Huck when we were planning this event that there aren't that many people who, that's not the way to say it. Huck is one of my favorite teachers, and the fact that he's not here in person disappoints me tremendously, but we still have him here this way. So Huck, the presentation is yours.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to share my screen if this works. Hopefully it does. Share. I'm going to talk about Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, and I'll warn you at the start, it's a little unfortunate. I'm going to go on for about an hour and 10 minutes. I talked to my friend, I'm going to name drop here, talked to my friend Bernie Sanders. He and I go for walks once a week, and I told him, we were talking about Song of Myself, actually. I was talking about it, and he said, tell me about it. And I said, well, it's a very long poem. It's like 55 pages, and I'm going to talk about it for an hour. He said, 55 pages? I can't imitate Bernie. He said, 55 pages? I didn't know poems could be that long. Well, this is a very long poem. It is, I think, without parallel, the greatest of all American poems. And the reason I'll go on so long is that trying to wrap one's hands around the whole of this gigantic poem, which is as big as the man who wrote it, who is a gigantic man. I am large, I contain multitudes, he says, and we'll get to that late in the poem. is quite a feat, and I don't think I can do it in 50 minutes. So it's going to go on a little long. And that means if you have questions, you can ask them in chat, but we may or may not get to them. But you can also just send them to me directly. But not only questions, but comments or arguments at huck.gutman@uvm.edu, huck.gutman@uvm.edu, and I'll answer anything you write me. So let's look at Song of Myself, a very long poem. I think you'll see that the central themes are probably the self, which will come up in the first lines, democracy. He's the most democratic of all American poets, and I think he's played a role in world poetry, poets who aspire to democracy, to speak for people, all turn to Walt Whitman. And I think he's also, and you'll see this also, a poet of the body. He accepts the body and how important the body is to our identity, to our sense of self. He'll also, as I guess most great poets do, he'll also talk about what it means to exist, and also about death, which is the end of existence. So let's just plunge in a little bit. Late in the poem, and we'll get to this section too, he says, he writes a line that no other poet in my experience, and I've read a lot of poetry, could have written. He says, sit a while, wayfarer, here are biscuits to eat, and here's milk to drink. This is a poet who, although the poem is going to be long and overwhelming and very strange, is also a poem which is encouraging to us. He encourages us. In these lines, he tells us he wants to give us sustenance and help us through. And we'll come to those lines later. And he also says in the poem, we'll come to this also, I think this is the great secret of lyric poetry, poetry that is kind of sung to a lyre originally. That's why it's called lyric poetry. This hour, I tell things in confidence. I might not tell everybody, but I will tell you. I think, and that's why I like poems so much, love them so much. I think poems speak to us of the things that we don't always talk about, but there's a kind of confidence between the confidence, meaning not being confident, but kind of a compact between the poet and the reader that he or she will talk directly to us about things that people don't normally talk about. Well, one final word about the poem. This comes from the preface to Leaves of Grass. He says, the old red blood and stainless gentility of great poets will be proved by their unconstraint. A heroic person walks at his ease through and out of that custom or precedent or authority that suits him not. And that is exactly what Whitman will do in this poem. He will reject almost all constraint and authority and custom and precedent to sound his barbaric, as he'll call it, we'll get to this too, his barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. He'll let what's in him out, knowing we're in confidence, and knowing that the rules of poetry don't always allow for that. Here's the first edition of Leaves of Grass. And I'm going to go textual on you for maybe just 30 seconds. He published this in, as you can see, 1855. And then as a poet, he kept adding poems and revising poems. And it went through 8 editions until the last, which is called the Deathbed edition of 1892. And the 1855 edition is the most important. This is where he announced himself to the world. And we'll come back to this title page and frontispiece. That's what you call this picture of Whitman here. Several times as we go through the poem, I marvel at it. If you pick this book up in a bookstore in 1855, and there weren't many published, and you paged into it, it occurs to you right away, and we'll get to this again later too. There's no author's name on it. There's only a photograph of the author, or it's actually an etching. And the etching is kind of suspect, isn't it? I mean, it's not a formal portrait. I mean, I could have worn a tie tonight, but I put a jacket on. He's in his carpenter shirt. It's often called the carpenter's portrait. He's wearing a working man shirt. His hand is in his pocket. He's kind of at ease and a little too informal, maybe for a poet. He has his hat on. We'll get to this line too. I wear my hat as I please, indoors or out. We normally take our hats off as a gesture of respect. So that's all we get of Whitman on the front page. 1855. And then if we turn the next page, this is from the original edition, we get a long preface, which isn't called a preface, and has paragraphs that are so long that you wouldn't want to read them. It is a brilliant work. I mean, I first got into it because a quite well-known poet broke them up into lines of poetry, just this exactly what's here, into Whitmanian lines of poetry. And only that way could I read the long preface. I'll quote from it a little bit later. So you get the preface, and then 25 pages in, here is called Leaves of Grass. And you notice this poem has no title. It's not called Song Myself. Got that title later in subsequent editions. And it has no numbers. If you have read all of Song of Myself, you know it has 52 sections, 52 weeks in a year. Oh, how convenient. But in this, it has no numbered sections. It just goes on and on and on. As my friend Bernie said, wow, 50 pages, right? And it's pretty stunning. We're going to look at these opening lines, these lines right here, these first 5 lines. This is actually section 2, and he's going to add to section 1. So I'm going to look at section 1 as originally, this was the beginning of Song Myself, and I'm going to use the numbering on the sections. He says, I celebrate myself, and what I assume you shall assume for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the spear of summer grass. Now I want you to see 2 things here. One is that unbelievable unconstraint. There are no rhymes, and the lines are, you can see they're different lengths, and I counted the syllables. No 2 lines have the same number of syllables. They're all over the place. This is really the first extraordinary use of free verse in the English language. There were previous poets who used free verse, but nobody ever used it as easily as Whitman did. And here I'm going to show you something that is pretty astonishing. I'm going to go to, I love to use colors in PowerPoint. I said there was no rhyme, but there's so much rhyme that we can't believe it almost. It's not end rhymes. I, my, my. That's a lot of rhymes. And in the first line, we have I, my, sell, right? That's a lot of rhymes in one line. And what I assume, you shall assume, you can see you and ooh and assume. These are all rhymes. Belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf, right? We have those lines in lines 4 and 5. My soul, my ease, I, spear and ease rhyme. So that there's an astonishing amount of rhyme within the lines. This is a person who's attuned to the music of words, even if that music doesn't fit into the patterns that we're used to of rhymes and maybe sometimes slant rhymes and regular patterns. His great contemporary, Emily Dickinson, the other, I think, the greatest American poets, wrote her poems, almost all of them, in what's called hymn meter, ABAB, or the rhymes, 8 syllables, 6 syllables, 8 syllables, 6 syllables. I mean, that's what she heard in church, and that's what she did, and that governed her poetry. Not for Whitman. It's all over the place. And let's look at how section 1 developed in 1892. It'll have more lines, and we're going to look at all of them. He starts out saying, I celebrate myself and sing myself. And already, if you are attuned to not only 19th century America, but even 20th and 21st century America, that's a lot of I. And there's a lot of self-celebration. I know Americans celebrate themselves, but he's the quintessential American, and he does what we're really not supposed to do by normal manners, which is talk about himself. This is a song of myself. So he's originally, at the very start, violating the conventions, and he added that and sing myself, I think in later years, because it connected this poem to the great epics of the past. You know, sing is the operative verb at the beginning of Homer, of the Iliad, and at the beginning of Milton's Paradise Lost. So he's writing an epic, and he's singing about himself, and he hastens to tell us right away. It's going to go throughout the poem. I said he's a democratic poet, and what I assume, you shall assume. That is, everything he says about himself is true for us too. For every atom belonging to me, as good belongs to you. So this too is not the usual stance of the poet. Poets usually tell about themselves, and we take it for granted that maybe we're like them, but most people aren't like them because poets are so sensitive. Not Whitman. Everything I say is true for you, and it's true for everybody. And then, I mean, I used to teach this. I was a Fulbright in India, as Bob mentioned. I would lie on the desk. I mean, who lies on the desk? Who lies on the grass and spouts a poem? I mean, you're supposed to sit up straight and spout a poem, right? I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing the spear of summer grass. So he's a loafer. And that too is, you know, so contrary to the Puritan upbringing of America. So great that my parents, who were immigrants, my father would tell me, don't be a loafer, right? That Protestant ethic of work, work, work. Not for him, he's going to loaf on the grass. And then he says, my tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents, born here from parents the same, and their parents the same. You notice all the rhymes in that line? So he is quintessentially American, but he speaks for all of us, even if we're not born here from parents the same and their parents the same. He says, I now in 37 years old in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. He's going to talk to us about what matters to him. And that is the beginning, our introduction to the poem. Now I'm going to jump forward. Well, it's one more stanza. I got ahead of myself. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while, sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbor for good or bad. I permit to speak at every hazard. Nature without check with the original energy. This is really what Nietzsche would write about at the end of the 19th century, going beyond good and evil. He's putting all belief systems behind. He's going to leap out into the reality of his existence. And he's going to say things, whether they're good or bad. If they well up in him, he's going to tell us. And as we'll discover, some of the things he tells us are pretty astonishing. So here again is Leaves of Grass. That was the beginning, and only actually the first 5 lines were the beginning of Song of Myself, which had no title, and there was no name of the poet on the title page. Now here is what would become section 5, and it has 2 parts. The first is truly, truly, truly astonishing. I believe in you, my soul. The other I am must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. What he's declaring here is that there is an equality between soul and the other I am, meaning the body. Ever since Descartes split human consciousness into 2, the objective and subjective world, ever since Descartes said, you know, thinking was different than being, we've had this split. And I think almost all our religious tradition says that the soul is far more important than the body. Not for Whitman. I believe in you, my soul. The other I am, that is my body, must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. I mean, he believes in the body profoundly. And that I think is part of what I treasure in Whitman. He reminds us that whatever existence we have, it is a bodily existence, and our bodies are not just an important part of us, but as important as the other parts of us. That what we feel and touch and do are as important as what we think and imagine and feel in our hearts. Pretty amazing. And again, he tells us, like in the first section, loaf with me in the grass. He's lying back on the grass, sprawling. Loose the stop from your throat. Those of you who are musicians know that's like an organ stop so that the sounds can come out. Loose the stop from your throat, not words, not music or rhyme. I want not custom or lecture, not even the best, only the lull I like, the hum of your velvet voice. I think he's talking, and I can't be certain about which it is, about he wants to hear the elemental sound of his existence, which is either his heart rate beat or his breathing. You can decide for yourself, it might be both. The velvet voice suggests to me the heart, but it could also be, we have an epiglottis or something, and so our breathing has. So he's going to lie in the grass and just feel a sense of being. And then comes one of the most amazing parts of the poem, even though it's coming at the beginning. I mind means I remember. I mind how once we lay, body and soul, such a transparent summer morning, how you settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me and parted the shirt from my bosom bone and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart and reached till you felt my beard and reached till you held my feet. So he's all encompassed. And if we study this carefully, I'm not sure, just like English majors, if we just study it carefully, we see that he's talking in metaphorical terms about something which is a feeling of oneness between body and soul, but it's also metaphorical terms about sex, about, dare I say it in the Athenaeum, about oral sex, being penetrated to his core. The head athwart his hips turns over and he feels encompassed. And this may be a point to raise a question that is difficult and vexing. What about Whitman and sex? I think most readers of Whitman acknowledge that his longing was for men. And this passage would certainly suggest something like that. In Song of Myself, he doesn't really say that. There's a certain amount of hiding for all his wanting to let everything out. There's a certain amount of hiding, but in later poetry, I think that comes out more. In any case, he's lying in the grass. He's feeling the hum of only the lull I like, the hum of your velvet voice. His lover turns, which may be the body and the soul, over on him and plunges his tongue to my bare stripped heart, and then he feels enclosed and comforted and maybe rocked like a mother rocking a child, and reached till you felt my beard and reached till you held my feet. And then this remarkable passage, this whole thing is remarkable. And swiftly arose and spread around me the peace and knowledge that pass all the argument of the earth, and know that the hand of God is the promise of my own, and I know that the Spirit of God is the brother of my own, and that all the men ever born are also my brothers, and the women my sisters and lovers. And that's why I bolded these lines. I just love them. And that a kelson of the creation is love. Limitless are leaves stiff or drooping in the fields, and brown ants in the little wells beneath them, and mossy scabs of the worm fence, heaped stones, elder, mullein, and pokeweed. He's just been talking about body and soul and consummation and wholeness and love over everything. And then he goes right back into all these little things that are part of our world. I mean, it's just such an extraordinary poetic move to go from the large and overarching to the particular and the small. And I'm going to show you some pictures. This is what a kelson, he says, a kelson of the creation is love. A kelson is that which holds everything in the boat together. It's that timber which keeps everything afloat. love keeps everything afloat. There's the kelson and the keel. Here's another picture of a kelson. Here's these things that he mentions: elderberry, mullein, so here, though it's box elder, this is mullein that grows all over Vermont, furry leaves. It's a biennial. You can see it. Here's pokeweed, grows in the more southerly states. It doesn't actually grow so much in Vermont. There's blossoms of pokeweed. And so he descends to all these things that grow up on the boundaries of things, where land is not cultivated, where it's also not the wild of the forest. It's on the boundaries. And that's true of box elder and of pokeweed and of mullein. So you can see he's talking about the boundaries of things. So it goes from love being what holds it all afloat to mossy brown ants and the little wells beneath them and all these things that are on the boundaries of things. It's the ballast of the real world for the large statement that everything keeps afloat on love. And then he goes into, this is not the most typical section of Song Myself, but it's one of the most wonderful. It's a series of questions, and I think it's a rhetorical question because I think he knows the answer. He's asking the question to get us to think. A child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. And you know what grass is, right? And you know what leaves of grass are. The book is called Leaves of Grass. The grass is made up of all these tiny little green things, okay? So a child said, "What is the grass?" fetching it to me with full hands. How could I answer the child? I do not know what it is any more than he. And then he guesses, right? I guess, because green is the color of hope, it must be the flag of my disposition. Okay. Or I guess it is the handkerchief of the lawn of the Lord. And here he's punning. In the 19th century, the finest of handkerchiefs were made of linen, another name for which was lawn. So a fine lawn handkerchief would be a fine linen handkerchief. Or I guess it's it's like a handkerchief, because handkerchiefs are lawns, except, it's God's handkerchief, and it's dropped all over the world that we can look around and say, where did the grass come from? What? It came from God. Or I guess it's the handkerchief of the Lord, a scented gift and remembrance, designedly dropped, bearing the owner's name somewhere in the corners that we may see and remark and say whose. He's going to keep guessing. Or I guess because it's little, right? Doesn't grow tall. The tallest grass, anybody know? Probably. Tallest of grass is corn, actually. Or I guess the grass is itself a child, the produced babe of the vegetation. Or maybe it's a uniform hieroglyphic, picture writing. If so, what does it say? Oh, here's what it means. It grows everywhere, this grass, sprouting alike in big fields and narrow little plots, in broad zones and narrow zones, growing among black folks as among white. Grass is not, comes from God, grows everywhere. It's not racist. Canuck, Ducko, from north and the south, congressman, rough guy. I give them all. I give them the same. I receive them the same. Well, we all get nourishment or pleasure from grass. That receive them the same is going to come up again as he goes further. Because he says, and now it seems to me, because we all go under the grass, the beautiful uncut hair of graves. It's a lovely image, isn't it? That the grass which grows on the earth is like hair. And if anything, it comes from graves. And then he says, tenderly will I use you, curling grass. It may be you transpire from the breasts of young men, hairs from the chest. It may be that if I had known them, I would have loved them. It may be you are from old people or from offspring taken soon out of their mother's laps. So the grass may grow from young men, it may grow from old people, it may grow from babies, and here you are, there's mother's laps. And then he notices something very surprising. The grass is dark green, and old people have white hair. This grass is very dark to me from the white heads of old mothers, darker than the colorless beards of old men. I think about that line a lot. I have, as you can see, a beard. And it is true, when men get older, their beards turn white, but if you go up close and look, they're kind of colorless. That's what white hair is so often, this colorlessness. The guy is a real observer. And then he says, this is one of the great lines in the poem, dark to come from under the faint red roots of mouths. You can feel, if you say that line to yourself at home, you can feel your palate, which is, if we know, if you look inside the mouth, it's kind of a pale red, faint red roots of mouths. All those colors go up into the mouth, and yet this dark grass comes from him, and he says, here are graves. Oh, I perceive, after all, so many uttering tongues, right? So they're not only leaves of grass, they look like a tongue, and they come from mouths. And I perceive they do not come from the roofs of mouths for nothing. Oh, he's so rhetorical here. I wish I could translate. He's going to translate. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about old men and mothers and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. And then he has these questions, and he's preparing us to jump off into the Empyrean. Poetry doesn't get better than this. What do you think has become of the young and old men? And what do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and ceased the moment life appeared. All goes on, in a cycle of life and death and new life and death and new life. I mean, he's just a believer in this great cycle of things. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses. There's no real death and ending. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Whew. Nobody in the whole history of human utterances could say this phrase, and to die is different from what anyone supposed and luckier. He doesn't mean it surcease from pain, as some might say about the luckiness of death. It's that it initiates something new, and it doesn't collapse. All goes onward and outward, nothing collapses. Now, I remind you that he's writing this at a moment, 1855, when the United States has been pushing westward. We had an expansionist view of the nation and its boundaries. But it's more than that. He really believes, I think, that not only is the nation expanding, but that life itself expands and expands and does not come to an end. Now we're going to skip now to section 11. Another atypical section is the most lyrical section in the poem. As I point out in this little thing, there is an I here. I learned this from a student of mine. I said, there's no I in here, and the student raised her hand and said, yeah, but there is. And that's true. There's an I in this. He's the observer in this, and he's watching a woman who's watching 28 young men who are swimming in the water beneath her. So here's the poem. And again, I said before that the poem is divided into 52 sections. Here we know that number 28 is one of those magical numbers. It has to do with the lunar cycle for a periodicity in human affairs, maybe for the female cycle too. 28 young men bathed by the shore, 28 young men, and all so friendly. 28 years of womanly life, and all so lonesome. Notice the contrasts in that. If we read poems, we sometimes pay attention to contrasts. There are 28 of them, and she's alone. They're young, and she's maybe not so young. There are men, she's a woman. See, men, womanly. And they're friendly with one another, and she is also lonesome. There's the whole poem right there. She owns the fine house by the rise of the bank. She hides handsome and richly dressed half the blinds of the window. So she's in hiding, and they're out in the open, and she has a fine house, and they're just frolicking in the water. They're probably workmen. She's up high, and they're down below. Lots of oppositions. Which of the young men does she like the best? Such longing, right, in her lonesomeness. from line 3. Which of the young men does she like the best? Ah, the homeliest of them is beautiful to her. Where are you off to, lady? For I see you. You splash in the water there, yet stay stock still in your room. How's that possible? Well, she's in her room, but in her thoughts, in her dreams, in her fancies, in her imagination, in her desires, she's among them. Dancing and laughing along the beach came the 29th bather. The rest did not see her, but she saw them and loved them. She loves all these men who are probably naked, maybe half naked, maybe they have underdrawers on, I don't know. But she sees them and she loves them. She wants to be with them. She's lonely and cut apart from them. The beards, and she notices them so intently, right? The beards of the young men glistened with wet. It ran from their long hair. Little streams passed all over their bodies. Oh, she sees all the water on these bodies. Oh, these bodies. An unseen hand also passed over their bodies. It descended tremblingly from their temples and their ribs. And then this final stanza, I don't see any way to read it, but kind of sexually. I mean, in her fantasy, in her desire, she is coupling with them. The young men float on their backs, their white bellies bulge to the sun. They do not ask who seizes fast to them. They do not know who puffs and declines with pendant and bending arch. They do not think whom they souse with spray. So this is all wishful thinking on her part. Rich, hiding behind the blinds, lonely, up on a hill. I think it may also be Whitman longing for men's bodies, and will return, believe it or not, will return to the bather later in the poem, although he's not going to say with a flag, hey, here's the bathing part again, but he will return to it. Okay, we're going on. These are things I didn't put in the reading packets, but I just think they're marvelous. So he has long catalogs. Catalogs are lists of all sorts of things that he sees and hears and encounters. And at the end of one of them, he says, I resist anything better than my own diversity. I'm going to take a pause. I think that is not a line that one hears too much in the United States Senate. Right? Walt Whitman, a working man, could say it and believe it. I resist anything better than my own diversity and breathe the air and leave plenty after me, and I'm not stuck up and am in my place. And there's room for all of us and everything that is within me. The moth and the fish eggs are in their place. The suns I see and the suns I cannot see are in their place. The palpable is in its place and the impalpable is in its place. To me, it's an astonishing line. And then notice all those B's and L's in that last line. This man was a poet. He was a great poet. Here's the line I started out with, and so I'm going to put it in here. He asks us in section 19, what do you think? Do you think he's going to ask questions to the reader? Do you guess I have some intricate purpose? You think I'm up to something? Well, I have, for the April rain has. Grows grass, and the mica on the side of a rock has. Do you take it I would astonish? Does the daylight astonish? Nothing astonishing about me. I'm just being natural. Does the daylight astonish, or the early red start? That's the robin twittering through the woods. Do I astonish more than they? This hour I tell things in confidence. I might not tell everybody, but I will tell you. That's why we read poems, I would suggest. We read poems. They're beautiful, and I won't gainsay the beauty. I think it helps keep us alive, but it's also that human beings can sometimes, maybe when they drink, maybe when they're in bed late at night, maybe when they're feeling like good friends who finally got down to it, but especially maybe in poems, can tell each other the things that are deepest in their hearts, that maybe shame prevents us from saying. I don't know. This hour I tell things in confidence. I might not tell everybody, but I will tell you. Emily Dickinson, this is a short poem of hers, which since I have it in my heart, I will recite to you. Now I've forgotten it. We introduce ourselves to planets and to flowers, but with ourselves have etiquettes, embarrassments, and awes. With ourselves, we're not so comfortable with ourselves, both our own self and the selves of other people. We have etiquettes, all sorts of rules and embarrassments. We're so often ashamed of what we feel. Etiquettes, embarrassments, and awes. And sometimes we just say, whoa, this is large. I want to live in the quotidian humdrum world. This is too big for me. Anyway, Whitman is going to tell us those things. And then he asks these questions in section 20. I find these the most amazing questions. Who goes there hankering, gross, mystical, nude? How is it I extract strength from the beef I eat? It is one of the great mysteries of human existence that I can eat yogurt and fruit and nuts for breakfast, which I did. And in the evening, I can be talking about poetry and having feelings of celebration and love. How does the material get turned into the ideational and even the spiritual? How does that happen? How is it I extract strength from the beef I eat? And then he says, who are we? What is a man anyhow? What am I? And what are you? All I mark as my own, you shall offset it with your own, else are what time lost listening to me. Ever the Democrat. If it's true for him, it's got to be true for us. And who are we? And then he says, I put this in because I like these lines. They're not the best in the poem. I do not snivel that snivel the world over. The months are vacuums like they're empty. Oh, life is so empty. And the ground would wallow in filth. Oh, it's so dirty. All this business of living is just such a pain. That life is a suck and a sell and nothing remains at the end but threadbare craven tears. And we get sold a bill of goods and at the end we just end up dead, in a coffin. And he says, fold them with powder for invalids, whimpering and truckling. Before the age of pills, people would compound, they're called compounding chemists, we still have it. And they mix up things and they put them in a mortar and pestle and they put them in a paper and they fold the paper up and fold it over again and say, take this home and drink it with water. Whimpering and truckling, fold with powders for invalids. Conformity goes to the fourth removed. We all do that. We all complain. We all mope. Me too. But he says, I cock my hat as I please, indoors or out. I have a hat here. Oh yeah, well, here's Walt Whitman. He's going to wear his hat. It doesn't matter, what we think. And I remember when I was a child, some of you may be of my age. I went to a public school in New York and we walked in the door and there was a principal there who said, take off your hat, right? Because you're not allowed to wear a hat in the building. I mean, there are a couple of religious traditions that say, put on your hat when you go in the building, but that's beside the point. And then a kind of a joke, shall I pray? Want me to be religious? Shall I venerate and be ceremonious? I have pried through the strata and analyzed to a hair and counseled with doctors and calculated close and found no sweeter fat than sticks to my own bones. Hey, there's me, there's a lot of me and also luscious, he will say later on. In all people, I see myself not one more, not more, and not one of barley corn less. And the good or bad, I say of myself, I say of them. And then I just throw this at you because he uses the word en masse. I think he's the great poet of the mass. He's talking about himself, but he's also talking about the great mass of us, the democratic body politic, which is made up of individuals, but we are all together. And then here we come to, at the absolute center of the poem, which would later be called section 24, he names himself. Remember that title page, Leaves of Grass, Brooklyn, where it was published, date 1855, picture, no name. Well, let me see if I have it here. Should have it here. Let's see it right here. I just figured I'd use Howell, because Allen Ginsberg uses long lines like Whitman. So I got an image of Howell, and I actually have the copy of Howell here. Here's the title page, Howell and Other Poems by Allen Ginsberg. but he doesn't have, as you notice, Walt Whitman on the front page. And in fact, as you discover, as I discover, you look at Hell and you look at the title page and the epigraph that he has here. He says, unscrew the locks from the doors, unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. That's going to come up in about 2 minutes. Quote from Whitman. Okay, so here's Whitman naming himself. Walt Whitman, an American, one of the roughs, a cosmos. Disorderly, fleshy, and sensual, eating, drinking, and breathing. I put down at the bottom of this page something I learned by heart, as all Boy Scouts do. The Scouts' oath, a Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I think I left out the brave. Anyway, none of us, if asked to describe ourselves, I think, pardon me if I'm presumptuous, would say, oh, me? 6 adjectives: disorderly, fleshy, sensual, eating, drinking, fucking, pardon the language. But that's what he says about himself. None of this trustworthy, loyal, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful. None of that. He's just full of appetites and desires, and not a sentimentalist. No standard above men and women or apart from them. No more modest than immodest. I'm like this. You're like this too. And then he says, "This is the line that I just said that Ginsberg cited on his great poem as the frontispiece to his great poem, Howl, which is about how he thinks maybe he's not of sound mind and maybe he's taken too many drugs and maybe he's gay, and he just lets it all out. And he says these lines, these are the great lines from Whitman. Unscrew the locks from the doors. Let's not let doors be locked. And then he says, the heck with it. Unscrew the doors themselves from their jambs. Let everybody come in and see what there is to see. Whoever degrades another, so you see me and you say, oh, that's terrible. Well, whoever degrades another degrades me, and whatever is done or said returns at last to me, and whatever I do or say also returns. I encompass everything of human beings. Through me, the afflatus, the kind of divine wind, the outpouring that's going to lead to poetry. Through me, the afflatus surging and surging. Through me, the current and index. I speak the password primeval. I give the sign of democracy. By God, I will have nothing. I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms. We all have it. We all share it. And those people who think that they're special and have something special for them, well, they're wrong. Because democracy is the great norm for Whitman. And this is, if I have to pick favorite passages and so myself, this is one of the 2 or 3 favorites of mine. He's going to be the poet of all of us. The people who haven't spoken, who have been long dumb without speaking, through many long dumb voices. And this is 1955, you know, we hadn't had the Civil War yet. But voices of the interminable generations of slaves, voices of prostitutes and of deformed persons, voices of the diseased and despairing, of thieves and dwarfs. I think when I read this of Princess Diana, maybe not who everybody thinks about all the time, but you know what, the thing that made her magical was when she went to an AIDS hospital in New York and she just hugged the people who had AIDS. She didn't care if they were diseased. She was one with them. I don't mean to deify her, but it was a remarkable episode. And he's going to sing in the voice of thieves and of dwarves and of sick people and despairing people, voices of the cycles of preparation and accretion. And now he's going to say, and I'm going to sing about the stuff that people are not supposed to say, of the threads that connect the stars, you know, gravitational forces, and of wombs, and of the father stuff. I'm going to sing of what women have within them, and of men and and their semen, the father stuff. And particularly, I'm going to sing of the rights of them the others are down upon. People are reviled, I'm going to sing of them. Nobody's going to be left out of my universe. Of the trivial and flat and foolish and despised. And again, as we saw in section 6, where he talked about the grass, he's going to come down with the most concrete of images to ground all this great rhetoric. A fog in the air and beetles rolling balls of dung. I'll speak of that which seems unable to be touched or contained, like fog, and of dung beetles, beetles among the feces. Through me, forbidden voices, voices of sexes and lusts. I want, I desire. Voices veiled, and I remove the veil. Voices indecent by me, clarified and transfigured. Nothing wrong with desiring. Nothing wrong in desiring who or what you desire. I do not press my finger. Don't say that. I do not press my finger across my mouth. I keep as delicate around the bowels as around the head and heart. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. Think about that line a little. Copulation is no more rank to me than death is. Actually, we are seeing in some of the southern states, Florida in particular, that copulation is probably more rank than death. Better not mention sex inside a classroom. Oh well, sorry, political commentary. And then he says, I believe in, and those of you who are Catholic and remember the old Latin Mass, it had a section called the Credo. I believe, right? I believe in the flesh and the appetites, seeing, hearing, and feeling are miracles, and each part and tag of me is a miracle. Divine am I, inside and out. I make holy whatever I touch or am touched from. The scent of these armpits, aroma finer than prayer. This head is more than churches or Bibles or creeds. And here I'm going to interject a section. I've seen this recently quoted in several places, but I like to say, well, I found it first, right? I didn't find it first, but in the midst of all that preface, he says, it gives a kind of prescription for life, and it's just so Whitmanian, so wonderful. This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons and with the young and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves, these pages, in the open air every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. I love that line. That's straight Socrates, right? Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face and between the lashes of your eyes and in every motion and joint of your body. And then he's just told us what he believes in. Now he says, and what do I worship? I worship my body. I have such a great body. If I worship any particular thing, I'm going to just read this through, but notice the repetitions of it shall you. So there's a kind of building rhetorical power of all these repetitions, which are rhymes. If I worship any particular thing, it shall be some of the spread of my body, translucent mold, that's the skin of me, it shall be you, shaded ledges and rests, firm, masculine, colder plow, i.e., it shall be you. Whatever goes to the tilth of me, it shall be you. You, my rich blood, your milky stream, pale strippings of my life, breast that presses against other breasts, it shall be you. My brain, it shall be your occult convolutions, root of wash, sweet flag, timorous spawn snipe, nest of guarded duplicate eggs, it shall be you. Mixed tousled hay of head, beard, and brawn, it shall be you. All those it shall be used. And this line here, root of wash, sweet flag, here are these images he's using. This is the sweet flag, this is its root, this is its very phallic flower. There's a nest of guarded duplicate heads, timorous spawn snipe. He's talking about his genitals. And what's so surprising is he's talking about himself and all his parts, and then all of a sudden the world itself is sexualized. Trickling sap, it goes from self to world, right? There's no boundary between self and world. Trickling sap of maple, fiber of manly wheat, it shall be you. Sun so generous, it shall be you. Vapors lighting and shading my face, it shall be you. You sweaty brooks and dews, it shall be you. Winds whose soft tickling genitals rub against me, it shall be you. Broad muscular fields, branches of live oak, loving lounger in my winding paths, it shall be you. Hands I have taken, face I have kissed, mortal I have ever touched, it shall be you. He worships himself and his body, and then switches almost without our noticing into worshiping the body of the world, and then back from that to the bodies of other people. Hands I have taken, face I have kissed, mortal I have ever touched, it shall be you. Great line. This poem is full of it. Great. You have no idea how many lines I've skipped that are great lines. I dote on myself. There is that lot of me and all so luscious. God, he loves himself. He is so luscious. I find no sweeter fat than sticks to my own bones. Each moment and whatever happens thrills me with joy. I cannot tell, how can this be? How my ankles bend, nor whence the cause of my faintest wish. I mean, that's one of these marvels. We can't explain how we can walk, but we can walk. And physiologists can explain everything with muscles and bones and leverage and this and that. But, you know, it's when I lived in Italy once, and I had so much trouble learning Italian. 4-year-old kids in Italy can speak Italian. Well, all of us can walk, right? Isn't that amazing? And that's what remarkable creatures we are. Nor the cause of the friendship I omit, nor the cause of the friendship I take again. To walk up my stoop is unaccountable. Oh my God, to just go into my house. I pause to consider if it really be that I eat and drink a spectacle enough for the great authors and schools. A morning glory at my window satisfies me more than the metaphysics of books. Or as Emerson, who is a great influence on Whitman, he says, I was reading, Emerson brought me to a boil. He says, Emerson said, books are for the scholar's idle times. When he can read God directly, the hour is too precious to be wasted in other man's transcripts of their readings. So he wants to read God directly in the flowers. And now he's going to see, this is the end of, we're coming to the end. This is not the very end of section 24. He's going to see the sun coming up. To behold the daybreak, the little light fades, the immense and diaphanous shadows, the air, which has no taste, but the air tastes good to my palate, hefts of the moving world and innocent gambols, silently rising, freshly exuding. I think he's seeing mists arising from the marshes, scooting obliquely high and low. And here comes the end. Something I cannot see. This is the sun, which is beneath the horizon, but already one sees the rays of the sun. And the whole world is suffused with desire, as he himself is in this section where he says, I worship my body, I believe in the flesh and the opposites. Something I cannot see puts upward libidinous, desirous, sexually desirous prongs, seas of bright juice suffuse heaven. So he's seeing the sunrise, first the rays of light coming, and then the whole sky in the east is orange and pink and red. The earth by the sky stayed with the daily close of their junction. The heave challenge from the east that moment over my head, the mocking taunt, see then, well, whether you shall be master. An astonishing section. Let me go back. Well, we'll go to this one, but first we'll go back. You remember this section 24 began with him saying, Walt Whitman, a cosmos of a man having a son, or as in the version we had, Walt Whitman, one of the roughs, a cosmos. So he names himself in his book that had no name on the title page. And now he asks the ultimate, perhaps, philosophical question, what is existence? And he'll answer it in a typically Whitman fashion that is so overwhelming that I think the philosophers who pose this question recede as we consider these what are they? 2, 4, 7 lines. To be in any form, what is that? And this is a quahog, a clam. If nothing lay more developed, the quahog and its callous shell were enough. Mine is no callous shell. I have instant conductors all over me, whether I pass or stop. They seize every object and lead it harmlessly through me. I merely stir, press, feel with my fingers, and am happy. To touch my person to someone else's is about as much as I can stand. Who was it said? It was Keats who said, oh, for a life of sensations rather than thoughts. Oh, I feel how wonderful it is to be alive. I have instant conductors all over me, and to touch someone else. Take your philosophy, go somewhere else with it. It's about as much as I can stand. I'll leave that up for just a second, and then we'll go on forward. When I taught Song of Myself in an inner city high school in Washington, D.C., I said to my students, I think I'll pass over section 28 and 29. They're about sex, and they're awfully explicit. And they all said, no, don't skip over those. So section 28 and 29 are very sexual. I will not read them with you. You're not my students in Washington. Section 28 is well, to be blunt, it's masturbatory. Gorgeous. So we're moving now towards the end of the poem. He's gone into describing a lot of what he sees in the world in sections 30 through 39. And he's going to take leave of us. We'll see him do that. And what's so astonishing is, as I said before, is that he's going to buoy us up and encourage us, almost as if he were a kindergarten teacher and we're kindergarten students. He's not belittling us. He's being as supportive as human beings can be to other human beings. Here's something to eat, milk to drink. So here he is again, Walt Whitman, and that first book he's now named himself. And here he is as he was maybe a year or two after he wrote the poem, photographed by the famous photographer Matthew Brady. People used to have calling cards in those days with their photos on them, and they'd give them to people when they visit as tokens. And this was for his calling card. So we come to, we're not going to do the poem, but I thought I should give you this turning point. He's been observing the world, and he's, as I said, been the voice of the diseased and despairing. Not a cholera patient lies at last gasp, but I also lie at the last gasp. My face is ash colored, my sinews gnarl. Away from me, people retreat. So he's so identifying, so empathizing with sick people that he even appears sick. And then he says, askers embody themselves in me, and I am embodied in them. I project my hat, sit shamefaced and beg. Right? He's like anybody, even like beggars. And then he says, enough. Somehow I have been stunned. Stand back. Give me a little time beyond my cuffed head and slumbers and dreams and gaping. I discover myself on the verge of a usual mistake. Whoa! Who could say that they make mistakes? And his mistake, of course, in this poem is that he could somehow be ashamed of himself and beg. People should never, ever, in Whitman's view, be beggars. They should always be celebrating themselves and say they are like other people. So that's this turning point where instead of observing the world and identifying with it, he says, enough. I'm not going to have any more of that. And he says, now let us stand up in a section I've skipped. And here's section 46, which we'll do, and then we'll do 2 more, and then we'll be done. I know I have the best of time and space, and I was never measured, never will be measured. I tramp a perpetual journey. We're always en route, as the poet Paul Celan says in a famous essay. We're always en route. We're always heading somewhere. And you can tell because my signs are a good stout, rainproof coat and good shoes and a staff cut from the woods. No friend of mine takes his ease in my chair. I have no chair, nor church, nor philosophy. I lead no man to a dinner table or a library or exchange, but each man and each woman of you I lead upon a knoll, high hilly place. My left hand hooks you round the waist. My right hand points to landscapes of continents and the public road. This, he's going to be close to us. I guess he's not made for the Me Too age. His hand hooks us around the place. He said, look at all this stuff out there. You can voyage too. And then he'll say, not I, not anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. It is not far. He's so encouraging. It is not far, it is within reach. Perhaps you have been on it since you were born and did not know. Perhaps it is everywhere on water and on land. Shoulder your duds, your clothes, and I will mine, and let us hasten forth. Wonderful cities and free nations we shall fetch as we go. If you tire, give me both burdens. Oh my God, the guy is so wonderful, right? If you get tired, I'll carry your whatever you have to carry. If you tired, give me both burdens and rest the chuff of your hand on my hip, and in due time you shall repay the same service to me. For after we start, we never lie by again. You are also asking me questions, and I hear you. I answer that I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. This is what Emerson would call self-reliance. We each need to find out for ourselves. And in his essay, Self-Reliance, Emerson says, trust thyself, the entire universe resounds to that iron string. Trust yourself to go forward on your own journey is what Whitman is saying. And then he says these lines, which, as you know, I value. I mean, who could say them? Sit a while, wayfarer, right? We're going to go on a journey. It's only a short stop. Here are biscuits to eat and here's milk to drink. I'm going to offer you sustenance. I'm going to buoy you up. But as soon as you sleep and renew yourself in sweet clothes, I will certainly kiss you with my goodbye kiss and open the gate for egress hence. Long enough have you dreamed contemptible dreams. It's the most challenging, uplifting line ever written in America. Right? I want you to dwell on that. We have dreamed contemptible dreams long enough. We should dream large. Maybe we can walk into our dreams and try them on. I think that's in fact what Whitman did with his life. Now I wash, you know how you wake up, you have stuff in your eyes. Now I wash the gum from your eyes. You must habit yourself to the dazzle of the light and of every moment of your life. Long have you waited, timidly waited, holding a plank by the shore. Now I willed you to be a bold swimmer, to jump off in the midst of the sea and rise again and nod to me and shout and laughingly dash with your hair. Remember I told you section 11, the rich woman looking at these swimmers, these bathers would come back. Well, here we are. We too are going to be part of the bathers bathing in this sea of life. And here are lines that I think are, I know I'm saying a lot of wonderful things, but these are phenomenal lines. He says, I teach straying from me, yet who can stray from me, right? He's just told us, go out and find out for yourself. I follow you, whoever you are from the present hour. My words itch at your ears till you understand them. I do not say these things for $1. I mean, he's talked to us for 50 pages. He says, it's not just because I'm getting paid for it. And that's not just because I have time to fill because the bus hasn't got here. I'm talking for you, as you would talk to yourself if you only had the words and I have the words. You are kind of tongue-tied. I do not say these things for $1 to fill up the time while I wait for a boat. It is you talking just as much myself. I act as the tongue of you. It was tied in your mouth. In mine, it begins to be loosened. And, he's told us to go off on our own. And he's also said, but he'll always be with us. And so he's going to contradict himself. So we're coming to the last two sections here, and we'll end in about 3 minutes. Listener up there, here What have you to confide to me? Remember, he's gone and he's taking leave of us. He's put on his rainproof coat and his shoes, and he's going down the public road. Look in my face while I snuff the sidle of evening, to snuff a candle. The last of the daylight is here. The sun has come up. Now it's going down. Talk honestly, for no one else hears you, and I stay only a minute longer. The night is coming. Do I contradict myself? He said he's always going to be with us, but he's also leaving. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Whew, what a line. And for those of you who are interested, on Bob Dylan's last album, he has a long, extraordinarily wonderful song called I Contain Multitudes, which, of course, he got from Whitman. I concentrate toward them that are nigh. I wait on the door slab. Who has done his day's work and will soonest be through with his supper? Who wishes to walk with me? Will you speak before I am gone? Will you prove already too late? So this is his leave taking. He's about to go off. This is the end of the poem. So you know we're done. Up above, there's a hawk, right? The spotted hawk swoops by me and accuses me. He complains of my gab and my loitering. I too, just like the hawk, am not a bit tamed. I too am untranslatable. I sound my barbaric over the roofs of the world. And then he goes, just as the clouds go up into the sky. The last scud of day holds back for me. It flings my likeness after the rest, and true as any on the shadowed wilds. It coaxes me to the vapor in the dusk. I depart as air. I shake my white locks in the runaway sun. I fuse my flesh in eddies and drifted in lazy jags. He's becoming a cloud that's shaping and reshaping. And as he's disappearing, I bequeath, and what comes from the clouds but rain, I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love. If you want me again, look for me under your boot soles. If you look under your boot soles, you will hardly know who I am or what I mean. We're back to the grass, right? Child said to me, what is grass? I'm going to go up in clouds and come down as rain, and I'll become grass. But I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and filter and fiber your blood. Failing to fetch me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. And the poem, which began with I celebrate myself, ends up with a you. So he comes to us as we go on to the road of life. And he'll be in the grass under the soles of our feet. So I'm done. I want to encourage you, write this down. You don't have to do it. I have a website. I don't make any money from it. It's called www.huckgutman.com. And if you go to it, you can read. I send out poetry letters. I started when I worked for Bernie Sanders in Washington. And I thought all these people in Washington have no connection to the real world. I think poems do. Because as I said before, poems come from deep inside us, and they say things we don't even say to each other when we're being confidential, and certainly don't hear on MSNBC or Fox News. So I would send out poems to people, and I thought, you can't just do that, you have to have commentary. So I've been sending out poetry letters. I left Washington. I've been sending out poetry letters for 10 years, and they're all on that website. And every month I send out a poetry letter. Another is going to go out in a week on a very, very short poem by a Greek poet called Simonides. So please sign up. And on that page, you can, if you wish, read some letters about poems, but you can certainly sign up. And things will come in your email, and you know, that's a great thing about email. If you don't want to read it, you can chug it. You can put it in the junk mail or the discard, and I won't know. So please, I urge you to sign up, just because I do it, because I love poetry and I love talking to people about poetry. So that's about it. I'll take some questions if any of you have the patience. Bob Jolly will come back and moderate it. And also, if you want to write me, if you have questions, comments, arguments, I may not be right about everything. I certainly am not right about everything. And I may be contradictory, like Whitman says, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large, I contain multitudes. You're large and contain multitudes too. So if you want to write me, I'm huck.gutman@ubm.edu, huck.gutman@ubm.edu, and I promise to respond to any comments, queries, questions, arguments, counter analyses that you may have. So thank you very much. And Bob, you want to entertain some questions? Here he is.
Huck, first of all, thank you so much. There have been many comments in the chat saying, bravo, thank you. There is a beautiful one, which I just do have to read out loud here, if I can get back to it quickly enough. You have made my day better. That is from Chuck. Thank you for sharing your wonderful insights and enthusiasm. I have enjoyed this presentation very much. There was one that was even more specific than that. It was, thank you for talking about Whitman with the same enthusiasm with which he wrote. That is from Tom. So
that's very
bravo.
Nice. Let me say before we go to any questions that one of the great things about Vermont is its libraries. The smallest town has a library. There are libraries all over the place. They offer books to people. I don't know if you all know, but you can get books online from all the libraries combined through the Green Mountain Library Consortium. Of all the libraries in Vermont, maybe the jewel is the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. It is a gorgeous library. I mean, if you're a wealthy person, you can build with lots of beautiful wood and have beautiful wood finishing, and you can collect paintings and say they should be shown in the library. And one of the paintings which you saw at the beginning, which is a painting of Yosemite, is one of the glories of American art, and it's in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. On the, what is it, the second floor, Bob?
First floor.
First floor of the library. So I encourage you all, I know many of you live in St. Johnsbury, but some do not. It's one of the glories of Vermont.
Chuck, here is a question from Lucy. It's an early question, and I'm not sure if it was answered or not. She asked, how old was Whitman when he published Leaves of Grass? And on a page, he says, I'm 35. Was he 35 in 1855?
He says, I'm now 37 years old.
37
years old. Begin. It's within a year of that. I mean, there are debates about it. Here's the situation of Whitman. I'll be very brief. It's a little brief potted biography. He grew up in Brooklyn, and he was a newspaper reporter and ultimately editor. And a lot of American writers were newspaper reporters, preeminently Ben Franklin, Mark Twain, Ernest Hemingway, Theodore Dreiser. So he was a newspaper reporter, and he was an editor of a pretty good sized newspaper in Brooklyn. And he had, I guess, what we would call a midlife crisis. Maybe it had to do with his sexuality. I don't know. Maybe it had to do with where his life was going. And he wandered the beaches of Long Island, especially the North Shore, had a little notebook, and he copied phrases in it. And out of that, he made his first book, which was called Leaves of Grass. It was published, as I said, in 1855. The problem is he wrote it and wrote it again and wrote it again and wrote it again and wrote it again until he had 8 different Leaves of Grass. So he was in his late 30s when he turned to poetry, which is pretty amazing because there are poets like John Keats, died at 26, and Arthur Rimbaud, the great French symbolist, stopped writing poetry when he's 19 years old. So to come into poetry late, as Whitman did, is pretty astonishing. So that's the answer, Lucy. He was about 37.
Here's another comment. This was the best first Wednesday I can recall. I will dive into Whitman with new eyes and appreciation. Thank you. That is from Eileen.
Let me just respond to Eileen. Thank you, but the credit goes to Whitman. He wrote this. I don't know how he wrote such an astonishing poem. I don't. And I think if I'd met him, having read descriptions of him, I might not even have liked him, but he really did open up about who he was and what he was feeling. And he had this deep, deep sense that he spoke to and for all Americans. And I think he did, yeah. He's just a great voice in our history. So all credit to Whitman.
And a credit to you, as immortal as Leaves of Grass and Whitman himself, and Professor Gutman has done a marvelous job in describing this to all.
I'm gonna blush.
Thanks to all. There's another question up here. How was he accepted as a poet and as an American man at his initial publication in 1855? That might be a long answer, but
He was not accepted at all. Had like 200 copies, and when he came out with another edition in 1856, Ralph Waldo Emerson had written him a letter saying, "I greet you at the start of a great career," and he emblazoned that on the cover. Emerson didn't give him permission. He was a self-celebrator, self-publisher. Interesting little note on history. The only person who Emerson understood it was a great work, and so did Thoreau. Thoreau actually went to visit him. He left Concord, Massachusetts, and went and visited Whitman, who lived in an attic room with his mentally not very mature, defective brother. Whitman was an astonishing man. So was Thoreau. So he was not well received in his life. Late in his life, one of the great English poets came to visit him because he wanted to see this great exemplar of homosexuality. And Whitman said, "I'm not a homosexual, I have children." So he was in all sorts of denial about certain things, although he, as it said, did become more comfortable with his sexuality. He's one of those poets who became famous and accepted and canonical only after his death. And the other great poet at the time, Emily Dickinson, she wasn't even published till after her death. And then the poems were kind of Baudelarized or regularized and stuff. And only over the course of time did she become a great poet. So people of the time don't always get it, right? They thought at the time that Longfellow was the great poet, or Bryant or Whittier, but they were pale poets compared to Whitman. And I have arguments with a colleague in the English department that after the first years of the 19th century, after Wordsworth, who I adore, and Coleridge and Keats and Shelley and Byron, the great poets in the English language were in America. Whitman and Dickinson are far greater than Tennyson and Hopkins, who I love, and Browning, who I am a little dismissive of and shouldn't be. But those two Americans dominated poetry in the second half of the 19th century, as they did in the first part of the 20th century. T.S. Eliot was, after all, an American, even though he lived in Britain. William Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, Robert Frost, Elizabeth Bishop, all Americans. All, I guess there was this Irish guy named Yeats who was as good or better than many of them. Anyway, so that's a response to that.
Janice asked, how was Leaves of Grass received in its day? I think you've answered that.
Well, it was, nobody bought it.
Yeah.
Nobody bought it. And even when he got to 1892, he was not that well regarded. There's a famous passage. Thomas Wentworth Higginson, a critic, went to visit Emily Dickinson, who had sent him some of her poems, asking if he could say whether these poems live. And of course, he was a little, he published them. You know, he knew he was in the vicinity of genius. He didn't understand how great a genius, but she told him, and he wrote home to his wife. He asked, "Have you read Mr. Whitman?" So he was on the scene, and she said, "I hear he is scandalous or indecorous or something. Too much sex." You know, she wrote about sex too, but that's besides the point. But no, I think he didn't have. I think his great rise into the great gray poet, the great icon of American poetry, was posthumous after he died, not during his life.
One last question, this one also could be involved. How did the Civil War influence or change Whitman's view of America, and how did it affect his view of slavery? I think that's the second
That's a brilliant question. because I think I, I'm going to go very quickly, but I think Song of Myself, he says in it, long enough have you dreamed contemptible dreams. I think it was the dream he had of his life. I do not think he was quite fully out or comfortable with himself, although he claims he was. I don't think he could deal with people quite like he could. It's what he aspired to, not what he was. And when the Civil War came along, one of his brothers got injured and he went to take care of him. He spent the entirety of the Civil War in the hospitals in Washington, D.C. Washington was a great place for hospitals and nursing people, occasionally changing bandages, more often talking with them, patting them, bringing them jars of jam, as he tells it. And I think he had a comfort with the bodies of human beings who were deeply, profoundly injured, who were often dying. He had a comfort with those bodies and touching them that we don't always have touching people in real life. Not only gay people, but now in this Me Too era, and I'm not on a rip about Me Too, but we don't touch people anymore for fear that it will be misinterpreted. And I think it wasn't misinterpreted in the hospital. So I think the war changed him profoundly. I think he became the self that he had imagined himself to be. As for slavery, he was opposed to it, and he remained opposed to it. But I think for him, the Civil War was this great tragedy. He has a prose work called Specimen Days about the poems of the war. And he says the war was not a quadrille in a ballroom. It wasn't a dance. It was a charnel house. Nothing but dead people. And he wrote a small book, which later became part of Song of Leaves of Grass, called Drum Taps, which are poems of the Civil War. And the greatest of those poems is a poem called The Wound Dresser, who remembers the war as nothing but a series of injured people who needed to be comforted. So the question was about his relation to the Civil War. It was profound. It affected him more deeply, than anything in his whole life. I suppose if we were in Ukraine today, we might be affected in similar ways. I don't know.
Huck, are you up for two more?
Sure.
And I'll remind
Let me just say, if you want to go, you can go. I mean, enough of electric screens, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the numbers and nobody else is leading, so I'm going for it.
Thank you so much.
Just remember, you can contact Huck directly at huck.gutman@uvm.edu.
And I'll answer.
Yeah, and it's all true. So here's one. Who was the publisher? I have to scroll up here a bit. This is from Roman. Who was the publisher? The 1855 publisher, and how was it arranged?
Well, Whitman was a journalist. It was self-published. Yeah. I mean, this is a guy who had to promote himself all his life. Remember, he starts out, I celebrate myself. He had to celebrate himself. He did celebrate himself. He believed in himself, but he also, he didn't get a lot of help from the literary establishment. And as I said, when Emerson reached out to him, he abused that reaching out, but even so, he was quite the man.
The last question. What contemporary American poets are most indebted to Whitman or are Whitman-esque? Maybe two different questions there.
Well, he's dead now. Allen Ginsberg, acknowledgedly wrote long lines and was indebted to Whitman. I think there are a lot of poets. I think we encounter those long lines in I have to look. I forget his name. One of our contemporary poets, a wonderful poet, writes in long lines, and other poets write about the working class. I think, and this is sad, I think Whitman's impact is larger on international poetry, because I think wherever people, and there are a lot of them, write poems to speak up for the their own people, for the dispossessed and the rights of those the others are down upon, as he says, they turn to Whitman. And so his impact on poets around the world, Nazim Hikmet in Turkey or Pablo Neruda in Chile, is profound. And I think, and look, despite the fact that Richard Wilbur is a very great poet, almost all American poets of the 20th century have written in free verse. Right? Or certainly contemporary poets. Wilbur is old now. And I think that is because Whitman freed up language in ways that are almost impossible to conceive. And I think William Carlos Williams, who's the other great shaper of free verse, would have acknowledged that. Ezra Pound wrote a famous poem called Pact, where he said he struggled with Whitman long enough, let there be commerce between us. I think that free verse, which is not to be gainsaid, I think free verse is his gift to poets afterwards, and also enunciating the struggles of people. And I think that example looms large for every single American poet. I don't mean to talk too much. There's an American critic, a famous critic named Alan Bloom, and Harold Bloom, who is often wrong, but he wrote a book called The Anxiety of Influence, which I do not recommend because it's incomprehensible. But basically he said influence is not something where you hand down traditions. It's something where you do something and other people come along and say, well, what can I do? It's already been done. You know, and I think Whitman looms over every poet who writes in that way. I think that they have to carve out a space of their own that is not Whitman's or not Emily Dickinson's for that matter. And so his impact is immense, just absolutely immense.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you all for coming and joining. And don't forget, to go to my webpage, because you don't have to read the essays there. You can sign up for the letters. As I say, they'll come and you can, it's easy to delete letters. You don't have to read them. And also, if you have questions or comments or arguments, write me at UVM and I'll respond so we can continue this discussion.
A lot of people saying thank you and wonderful. So Catherine, thank you.
Thank you to all of you for attending.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for staying. And Huck, marvelous. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night.